Amazon Prime members now get free grocery delivery with a minimum order. You'll get your groceries with 2-hour delivery. So in that time, you can finally figure out where the biblioteca is, learn how to play the acoustic guitar, and I guess get a puka shell necklace. Do a makeup tutorial, but realize halfway contouring is hard, and you're beautiful just as you are. Whatever it is you're doing with your time, your shopper will be carefully picking out your favorite organic meats, produce, dairy, and snacks while providing contactless delivery to your door. Free 2-hour grocery delivery, now with Prime.
Welcome to the 316th episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Rutherford. Stay tuned for my interview with Robert Jackson Bennett, author of the new novel Shortfall, the second installment of the Founders Trilogy. Stay tuned for the interview. Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Robert Jackson Bennett, author of the just published novel Shortfall, the second installment in the Founders Trilogy. Robert, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Well, if someone listening hasn't heard about your novel Shortfall yet, how would you describe the novel and the Founders Trilogy?
Yeah, I would say that they should probably read the first one first, which is Foundry Side. It's set in a world where there's an art called scribing, which is like magic that functions like coding. The way it works is that you write runes on an object, which act as instructions that you have to make extremely clear and extremely logical that inform that object how it needs to disobey a reality. And if you get it wrong, then it could explode and or hurt you or do all kinds of things. This is extremely hard to do, which means that it takes a lot of school to do it, which means that you have to be extremely wealthy to practice it. So what's happened over time is that all of the workshops and the craft centers that used to do this have sort of consolidated into 4 large trading houses that control all of the scribing in the world, and have pretty quickly become like the robber barons of a trade empire. And so this is all practiced from the city of Tavan, and because Tavan has been split up among these 4 trade houses, there's no city government, there's no city police force. There's the 4 places that are walled off and owned by the trading houses, and then there's people who are just kind of out of luck. The protagonist of the story is named Sanchia, who is a thief who's actually been scribed, and that's extremely hard to do. It's hard to scribe a living being, but she actually is a scribed person, and she has some talents that make her extremely good at thieving, and she's been hired to steal an object that has just been shipped into the docks, and she has taken the job aware that it could be from other trading houses, but she really doesn't want it to be, because usually if you deal with the trading houses, you wind up dead. She successfully steals the object, comes back to her apartment, and finds out that it is a key that can talk in your head when you touch it, and that it is an extremely powerful scribed item. And things go downhill from there.
Interesting. Well, do you remember the original idea that led you to write the Founders Trilogy?
Sure. I had a desire to write a story with a magic system in it, and I wasn't quite sure how that should work, because there's lots of books out there that people like because they like the magic. Because when a magic system works quite well, people tend to have a lot of fun with it. It seems like something that they could play around in, like a sandbox game. So I was driving around thinking about magic and how it works, and I was actually kind of getting frustrated, because for most magic, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But the like way that I think about magic is, how could someone find that this exists and find a way to like exploit it? Um, and when you think about something like Harry Potter, the like idea is that you find a magical beast, you kill it, you take a piece of it, and then you put it inside of a piece of wood. And then if you stand in the right way and hold that piece of wood the right way, and you say the right amount of like mumbo jumbo, and if you think the right thoughts, sometimes you can make the world change. And the more that I thought about it, I was like, there's absolutely no way that a human being could find out how this works. And it's also not clear how someone like makes new spells, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started thinking, I was like, well, what is magic really? And I decided that magic was a series of instructions that are told to the world that can convince the world to change. And at first, I thought of it as sort of a legal code where you could write a contract with reality that would convince it to change. But the more that I thought about it, the more that I felt like code was a much more fun way to play with it, since code is something that we all kind of know a little bit about. And it's hard and it's like definite. Like laws are kind of squishy. They change. It feels like they change all the time.
Right.
But code is something that we get.
So are you a coder yourself?
I think everybody these days is a coder a little bit. I'm not a big coder myself, but I do a lot of stuff in Excel and in databases and things like that. And it like the way that I think about it is that you sort of have to nudge these like systems into finding the right places to look for things, and then make sure that they are looking like in the right place for the like instructions for then what to do with those things. So it is really all about trying to design a reference point for all these things to happen. And that's a big part of scribing in the story too. One of the things that they find pretty quickly is that if you want to convince a reality to do something really, really crazy, it takes a lot of runes, more than could like ever fit on an object. Like if you want to convince like an arrow to that it's not flying through the air, but is instead falling, so that it goes straight, and that like it accelerates as it flies. That's a huge amount of runes. So the thing you have to do is you have to create, much like in a database, sort of like a bank of code that you can then that can then be like activated as a reference point just by putting like one rune on the arrow. So that like one rune says to the arrow, look at this bank that's far away, that's full of the strings and strings of code that then say like what the arrow really should be doing. And so really what this was it was a magic database. But the way that it works in the story is that it's almost like a nuclear reactor, because these like places are storing piles and piles of arguments that convince like reality to change. So if you hang out close to one of these places, like you get horrible headaches and like your nose starts bleeding and things feel thin and strange, it's not fun to be around them. And they're also hugely dangerous. If something goes wrong or they aren't like maintained carefully, then the world close to these like banks of runes like just go haywire, and they can like wipe out like reality like around them, which is very bad.
So what are your earliest memories of reading science fiction and fantasy, and what are your earliest memories of going beyond reading to writing your own fantasy stories?
My earliest memories of reading science fiction and fantasy, probably Madeline L'Engle back in the day. That was a big one. I also recall reading. I think I mostly just read the things that my brother read. Like, I remember I was like 6 or so, and he read, um, I think it was like Ender's Game. And I remember reading that one as well and being really surprised about the amount of nudity in that book. Um, and then it wasn't until high school that I read The Lord of the Rings. And I got super into that. Like I had all the maps and stuff like that.
Right.
But it wasn't until like high school or college that I started to think up stories that I wish that someone else would write, but they didn't seem to be writing them. So I felt like I had to do that for them.
And so what was that like, your first early efforts?
They were terrible. They were probably mildly sociopathic. And but they didn't really have the guts to actually be sociopathic. They wanted to have all of like the cool, like posing of being like super violent and like nihilistic, but I didn't actually want to do that stuff. So it was probably very bad. It wasn't until college that I completed my first novel. I believe, if I recall, it clocked in at 177,000 words. No, sorry, 750,000 words.
Wow.
I recall doing like the editing for it and thinking each time that I read a scene that didn't work that well, I was like, well, obviously this needs some more words to make it clearer. So each chapter, I think, was like 30 to 50,000 words. It was absolutely insane because I really didn't know what a book looked like. And it's like trying to make a pot out of clay. It seems simple. It's just sort of a big cup thing. And you got the clay, just sit down and do it. And it's not until you actually do it that it turns into a giant ball of mud. And it takes time to like work it again and again to realize how your hands work with the clay, how the clay works like with itself. These things take time to learn how to do. And so I found that I had to write a lot of different types of books until I found the format or the structure that worked for me. And I still try and change that up quite a bit. I know that there's a pretty striking difference between The Divine Cities, which is my previous series, and this one, both in how they like how the worlds work and in how the stories function.
And so can you talk about the process of getting from first novel that was 750,000 words to kind of the publication of your first novel? What was that process like?
Let's see. So there was the first book, which was 750,000 words. I junked that one. Then after that, if I recall, I wrote a short comic novel because I was pretty good at writing things that were funny, I thought. Like I would write things for my friends like on the internet, and they thought that these were like really funny, and I thought that would be my thing. I would be a comic writer. But I also wanted to write like fantasy. So I wrote a short novel about Jack the Giant Killer, like still being alive today and still slaying giants. But it was also a mystery novel and a comic novel. And it was kind of a mess. But I could tell at points that the story wanted to go a lot darker, and I couldn't let that happen. I submitted that. I got a few like agents kind of interested in it. They wanted to read more of it. Like one of which is my current agent. She does not recall that book. She's like, yeah, I don't remember that one at all, which is probably a good sign of how bad it was. But that one didn't work. So I wrote another short novel about 72, like 80,000 words that I think all vain young men write at some point in time about a young man trying to like discover himself, usually by drinking and partying and having sex. And it was very much like an indie movie kind of a book, like the late 90s like indie movie scene. It felt like that. That one did not get any responses, nor should it have. And it wasn't until I had been thinking about the idea of trying to take myths and fantasy and trying to combine them with something else. Because I recall that Stephen King had said that he'd been in college and had wanted to write a fantasy novel, but he wasn't sure what it would look like, and or he wanted it to be different, but he didn't know how it wanted to feel.
Amazon Prime members now get free grocery delivery with the minimum order. You'll get your groceries with 2-hour delivery. So in that time, you can use photo filters to imagine what you would look like with bangs. But don't do it. Just imagine. Meditate. Notice your body. Feel your breath. Am I doing this right? Get lost in a Wikipedia spiral. How do flowers propagate? Whatever it is you're doing with your time, your shopper will be carefully picking out your favorite groceries while providing contactless delivery to your door. Free 2-hour grocery delivery, now with Prime.
And one evening he took mescaline and went to the movies and saw the good and the bad and the ugly. And he was like, I want to write this. This is the thing that I need to do. And that was how he wrote The Gunslinger, which became the Dark Tower series, which I was a huge fan of up until book 5.
And so I'm assuming you didn't like the ending?
No, I don't love the ending. I mean, I don't know. It gets very self-involved. I think the thing that works about that series in the first few books is how the world is not explained, how the rules aren't explained. And then he tries really hard to explain all the rules. And there's some that, and the most interesting rules he leaves unexplained.
Right.
So it doesn't quite work in the end, is my opinion. But I had been thinking about that, and I saw this movie called The Proposition. I don't know if you've seen that.
I don't recall.
It is extremely violent, set in Australia. It's a cowboy movie that feels oddly spiritual, I'll say. And I had read a lot of reviews of it, and Roger Ebert had compared it to Blood Meridian, which I had never read. So I went and I read that. And I had this theory that I should, and I think that this is also a very young man thing to do, to write a story like Cormac McCarthy. So I wanted to write a story like Cormac McCarthy that was a fantasy. And so I chose The Great Depression because I felt like that was like an era where the rules were all suspended and things were in immense upheaval. And so things were really messy, and that's a great place to stage a lot of stories that would normally feel outlandish. And so I wrote a story about a man trying to find the vagrant who killed his daughter, who he believes was a hobo. But as he takes to the rails to chase him, he slowly realizes that this person might not actually be a person at all, because he finds more and more people who are trying to find this person. I had always thought of myself as, so I wrote that book. I shopped that book around. My agent sent me back an email saying that she wanted to read the whole thing right away. I sent it to her. She said she really liked it, and things went on from there. We shopped it around to a few different publishers, and one was super interested. They were like, I just am concerned that I want to make sure that this gets the money that it deserves. And I was like, oh boy. But then it went to the committee, and it got shot down. So that didn't happen.
Yeah.
But then it got picked up by Orbit, and they published it. That was Mr. Shivers. And looking back on it, it is a young man's novel. It is me trying to do an impression of Cormac McCarthy. I don't really write like that much anymore. And so more to the point, they wanted to publish it as horror, and this was in 2010. It was actually 2009, right after the crash. And I was like, I don't really see myself as a horror writer. I write like fantasy, like this book has like magic in it and stuff like that. And but they were like, no, horror's going to be a really big thing. It's going to come back and it's going to be a huge thing. But it wasn't until about 2 years later that we realized that when folks talked about horror like being a huge thing, what they really meant was zombies. That was what was going to be a huge thing. Horror itself was not going to be a huge thing. It's still not a huge thing, is my understanding. So there was a big push in the early 2010s to make a lot of horror, and none of it really turned out that well. And I know plenty of authors who were part of that push who tried to like hell to get out, and I am one of those people. Um, so yeah, and so then after that, I wrote three other books. They're also about like America at points in the like early 20th century that explored, the roots of where our nation came from. And one was like a science fiction, a detective novel. One was a fantasy, and the other one was like a science fiction fantasy. None of them did especially good. Like American Elsewhere, I think has done possibly the best. It's survived the most, but it really wasn't until I published City of Stairs and became sort of a fantasy writer that I started to actually get more fans and more like attention, and that was what I used to sort of build the support that went into Foundry Side and Shortfall.
So with Foundry Side and Shorefall, which are, as we've discussed, are the first two books in a trilogy,
Mm-hmm.
what was your planning and writing process for the trilogy before you sold it and before the first book was published? Did you plot and outline the entire trilogy before you started writing?
No. Um, what I've found, and my editor would probably agree with this, is that when I plot a story, what it's like you're a teacher and you have a student who you haven't met yet and you don't know them. But you say, all right, here's what I'm going to teach them. Here's how I'm going to teach them. Here's the grades that I expect. They're going to hit these marks, and then they're going to get past like this course, and then they're going to go to this college, get this degree, and then get this job. And then of course you meet the kid, and they have some very different ideas about how that all works, and trying to make them do this thing that you chose for them doesn't work well, and they hate you. So when I plot a story, I've learned that I need to be kind of loose with it because as you write it, you can sort of feel a tension build. It's like being in a meeting and you can feel someone not talking about something that should be talked about, but it's hard to say it out loud. To be like, wait a minute, I feel like there's something unspoken here. This isn't clear. I'm not sure what we're doing here. And or you realize that you need to have someone else in the meeting. And so usually I try and follow those like instincts, but those instincts don't really show up until I'm actually like writing those moments. And then I realize that like the book needs this thing, so I have to go back and add that in like earlier. And actually, this is so interesting. Maybe I should do this instead of this. So those instincts have usually served me pretty well. So I really try not to plot that much anymore. Plotting for me is very binding and constricting, and I don't like it that much.
So are you writing another novel now?
I'm trying to. It's pretty hard in a quarantine.
Yeah.
I thought that staying at home would mean I would have more time to do this stuff. But as it turns out, you need like 1 to 2 hours a day of like not being interrupted to get things done. And that doesn't happen with two children in a quarantine. And usually by the time that they're asleep, your wife and you just want to have like time together without children. You can just like be adults and not have to be like trying to get them all logged into this or that or possibly eat. That's something else that we do. So it's been enlightening. I will put it that way.
So what advice would you offer for listeners who are writing their own stories and novels and potentially pursuing publication?
I think that probably the best advice is the stuff they've heard a lot, which is just to write, to make mistakes, to doubt yourself. I mean, it feels weird to doubt yourself. There's always a lot of doubt that always comes with the stages, the stages of writing something. But the thing that I usually try to get people to think about is, if you've ever watched an action movie, there are some that feel really good, where for some reason the action makes sense, and there's some action movies where the action does not feel like it makes sense, where there's a lot of stuff happening, but it's hard for you to grasp it or cling to it. And usually, what I've found is that in these like action movies that lack that feeling of sense, there hasn't been a thoughtfulness applied to the audience to position them, like in the action, in the space where things are happening, so that they can feel how the characters like move through this space, feel the ideas that they have in this space with all the resources around them, and these ideas feel like intuitive, and they also grasp the stakes of what's happening in this space. And like one of them that I think is a good movie, but has this happen a lot, is Inception, where the action feels like a blur. It's not really a space that exists. It's an urban fog. And so there's a lot of stuff happening, but it's a little hard to grasp onto, like, where is this now? We're deeper in, but like now that we're like deeper in, it's larger too. And I really try and get people to think about that, because that applies to things beyond action. If you want people to grasp the characters, or to grasp the themes of your story, or just to grasp the scenes that you're trying to describe to them, you need to think about the handholds that like the audience needs to pull themselves through what you are giving them. And that's harder to do than you think. Because you want to give them enough, but not too much. You don't want to spend a huge amount of time like trying to describe. They're on this hill. They are on this hill. There are trees here. Blah blah blah. And then it's not until like later that you realize that actually this scene doesn't matter whatsoever. All the like important stuff is somewhere else. But trying to like design your stories, and that's the word that I like to do to use, is I think very critical. Because to like design has a level of thoughtfulness to it. It is like an awareness that someone else is going to be in this thing that you've made, and you need to make it easy for them, but also enrich.
That's interesting. So what books have you read recently, fiction or nonfiction, that you would recommend?
I'm reading. I tend to read a lot of nonfiction these days. Lots of history, because history I'm finding is usually crazier than fiction, and it also has really good jumping off points for you to learn about how humans make weird little mistakes or have ideas that can help your worlds feel more rich, feel fuller, and feel more vibrant. There's the one I'm listening to right now is the Eric Larson book, The Splendid and the Vile, about Churchill.
Mm-hmm.
That one is the one that I'm listening to right now. The one that I listened to previous about the Opium War was I believe it's called Imperial Twilight, I think is what that one was called. That one is really great because I actually don't know a lot about China, or how it got started on what they call the 100 years of, I believe, humiliation from the 1860s to the 1960s, where just the whole world just beat them all up,
Right,
for horrible reasons. But The Opium War and the decline of their empire is really interesting because of the sheer breadth of corruption that they went through, and trying to understand like how every level of governance was completely corrupt, and like ordinary people couldn't do anything, and the emperor couldn't do anything because it's everywhere, and how that made them incredibly weak and very vulnerable to outsiders. That's something that I feel like has dire warnings for us today, because once that trend starts, it's very hard to stop it.
True. Where can people find you online if they'd like to learn more about you and your novels?
I'm on Twitter at Robert J. Bennett. I also have a website that I guess I update. I don't really remember. At robertjacksonbennett.com. But yeah, that's me.
Great. Well, again, we've been speaking with Robert Jackson Bennett, author of the just published novel Shortfall, the second installment in the Founders trilogy. Go go buy both of the two books in the trilogy that are released now. And Robert, thanks for doing this interview.
Sure. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Great.